never been a time where there's been so much attack on certain ingredients.
When we asked the Americans how they would feel if they learned that there was dihydrogen monoxide in the food supply.
In addition to thinking about what you list ingredients as, I think it's really important that we use, as you said, use plain English.
I think there's also the question of just this fear of things that people don't understand. They said, what? Welcome to HearSay, a podcast from the language strategists at Maslansky & Partners, where we analyze messaging and talk about what worked, what didn't, and why, so that we can make sense of the world around us through the lens of language. From business to politics to culture and life, remember, it's not what you say, it's what they hear, which is why we call this podcast HearSay. Welcome to our new season. Lee, I can't believe that this is our 6th season of doing HearSay.
It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And we've done some great episodes. We have some interesting topics to take on this new season. We will do our annual Super Bowl episode in just a few weeks. But there is so much going on in the world that a language strategy impacts that we're going to have plenty to talk about this year. But excited to talk about Super Bowl commercials because we always have a good time with that one. But today, we're going to focus on something a little bit more serious. And that is the landscape for food and beverages, what's happening with the MAHA movement, and how our perceptions about what we put in and on our bodies is really changing in ways that impact lots of industries, lots of industry sectors, and lots of people. I think everyone's probably familiar with the term MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement. We talked about it a little bit in our last episode, or our episode last year, I should say, on vaccines. It is at its core something that's been driven by RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services. But when it comes to food, he has really made the removal of artificial additives the focus of the MAHA agenda. And we're going to talk about this agenda, who's part of it, and what it means for food companies. With me today, I have my regular partner in crime, Lee, and also our colleague, Jason, who has done a ton of work in the food space and is our resident behavioral scientist, and we'll kind of get into some of the psychology behind this as well. And while this episode is going to focus on food, it is not just for people who work in the food industry. I think a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about really have broad applicability in so many areas. But let's jump into it, and we'll get into what are some of the challenges for companies and how can they address these challenges most effectively. But to start us off, let's just talk about the MAHA movement. This was a fringe movement, it seemed like. Lee, is it still a fringe movement, or is it a movement that we need to really pay attention to?
It's gone mainstream. And it's so fascinating how fast it has happened. So just a year ago, if you were to ask me the impact of the MAHA movement on how people make decisions about vaccines, food they eat, what they put in their bodies, I would have said it's a fringe movement. Probably about 10% of Americans are part of it. The truth is, more than 40% of Americans are reconsidering their position on vaccines. 75% are putting more focus on what they put in their bodies. And a lot of the language that the MAHA movement has put out there, whether it's about food ingredients, around dyes, the awareness is cannot be understated. And if you look at what just happened in the news over the last couple of weeks, RFK Jr. and the Department of Health and Human Services has inverted the food pyramid. And I think it's more than just the inversion of the food pyramid. It's inversion how we look at food. And he's talked about how we have to eat real food. He's got a huge social media presence, this language and this idea.
Hold on, I'm going to take a bite of my fake sandwich. Hold on, just bear with me.
I think it's such an interesting frame, eating real food as opposed to fake food. It's such a smart language strategy that it has, and it's impacting all of us, and it's certainly impacting our clients in the food and beverage industry. Now, at the same time as this is happening, where people are really concerned with what they're putting in the bodies, we have the rise of GLP-1s. And, we're seeing something like 1 in 9 Americans, 1 in 8 Americans are starting to consume GLP-1s. So that's also changing the way people consume food. So now our clients have a big business challenge. People are eating less. They're eating more protein, less processed foods. They're buying in this notion that there has to be real foods. And a lot of our clients are saying, like, what are we going to do? And they're rethinking business strategy, when in many ways, I think they have to think about not just what they're doing from a business strategy, but how they engage and communicate in this moment.
So before we get into kind of what we do now, I feel like it's a little bit of deja vu all over again, which is that like this is not new. We did work on ingredient insecurity. I don't know. I feel like it was 10 years ago where there was the move to natural and organic, and people were focused on what was going in their body, and there's always been this kind of push for more natural food, more organic food, and it's always been with a portion of the population. Is this different?
It is very different, in my opinion. So that movement changed the way people thought about food. No one ever thought about where their eggs came from. Are they organic? Are they free range? But in some ways, that was a luxury. There was a certain set of people who were looking at food differently, and you were able to do so if you could really afford it. A lot of people could still say, you know what, I just need eggs. I need that, and I'm gonna shop on price. Now what we're looking at is people are saying, I'm not sure that I can afford not to change how I eat, because if I think about something that has red dye, I might get cancer. It's a very different thing. It's not luxury, it's essential, and it's about survival, which really means that this is a hardwired thing very differently than I think when the movement started 10 years ago.
Jason, what are you seeing when you think about how food companies are addressing this moment or approaching this moment that is different from their perspective than maybe what's gone on in the past?
Yeah, I would say this moment is certainly heightened in terms of the environment having a lot more risks or sensitivities around specific ingredients. There's certainly never been a time where there's been so much attack on certain ingredients, and these have now become ways in which companies are having to deal with how do we manage our product portfolios, knowing that there's many of these ingredients across the breadth of our portfolios. So I'm sure many companies are thinking about what are the best ways. Do we reformulate? Do we actually hold our ground and find a way to, convey our audiences that these are in there for a purposeful reason and we need to keep them in there? So there's certainly a lot of ambiguity, but nonetheless, this has certainly created this pivotal moment for companies to communicate with their audiences, no matter what stance they take on their product decisions and how they're going to move forward with certain ingredients.
Okay, so I think we're gonna focus on a couple of aspects of this. If you're a food company, then the question is, do you reformulate? Can you reformulate? And those are not entirely the same, but they're very related. And if you do, what do you do to the products that are on the shelf? And if you do or if you don't, how do you talk about what you've done? And each of those, I think, has kind of, you have to make some critical decisions about how you're going to talk about and frame that. And I think we've seen examples: Heinz, General Mills, Nestle. They've all committed to removing synthetic dyes from their products. The International Dairy Foods Association joined in. There's some bans in California. And so we're getting to a place where artificial additives are either going to be forced out, or other ingredients, companies are going to see that there are either need or opportunity to take them out. So I think, one of the things that to me is always important to focus on before we get into the framing is that, these are not easy challenges for companies. I think as we think about ingredients and the work that we do, generally what you see is that there are reasons why our ingredients are in the foods that they're in, either because they are an artificial ingredient is probably either lower cost than the more natural one, or it drives kind of performance of the product, makes it taste better, makes it look better, something that consumers have said that they've wanted. And so they're wrestling with the question of what is the balance, and kind of can they afford to remove an ingredient, both from a cost perspective, but also from a perception perspective, in order to get the benefits of health. But let's start with the reformulated. So companies are thinking about reformulating, and what do they need to do or think about in the context of reformulating their products?
So I'm going to just say that when you think about this, you've got to start with what customers are going to think or what customers are thinking right now. So if you're reformulating, the questions that people have are sort of like the why are you doing it? Are you kowtowing to pressure? Do you have my best interest at mind? Is it that you've been evil all these years and you've been doing something bad and now you've decided you've gotten caught? So there's this sort of baggage, it's all underneath the surface that you need to understand before you even communicate. Because this isn't just about, okay, now we've reformulated. When you say we've reformulated, if you were just to say that, people have a million questions. And I think we need to make sure that we understand that and sort of prepare for those questions in our language. So as we would contemplate this kind of a challenge, I would make sure that we understand all of those questions that we just sort of like walk through.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying there. I think a good framework to think about that is, what is the intent underlying the ingredient change? And then, so answering the question kind of why is that company making the choice? And then lastly, the identity element. So there's ingredients, there's identity, or ingredients, there's intent, and then identity. So that third layer is like, what is this saying about me as I'm a consumer buying that product? So I think, understanding and fully fleshing out those answers to that can help give a better understanding of why you should be reformulating in the first place.
I think to the identity point, I think there's something that's very, very provocative about this idea, because when we first started talking about food ingredients, and we started not first start, but when we started working with clients about 10 years ago on food ingredients, there was this sort of elite movement where if you were carrying around a certain brand, it said something about you. You were part of this elite, thoughtful, you're probably mindful. There was all kinds of things that went along with it. This is different in that it's not as much an external identity as it can be an internal identity too. Like, I am actually being thoughtful and protecting myself and my family from these big bad companies. And I'm thinking about that. And it's not just one company that might be bad. Like, I might look at fast food chains or the obesity, the companies that are so quote unquote obesity. Now I'm looking at everyone. I'm looking at every label. And so identity becomes a little bit different in this. I am identifying as a protector of myself and my family against something, which is different. And so I'm also very mindful in this moment of things that we've done before, where it's like you could say everybody's mindful of this, so I'm just going to reformulate. But as people are protectors, they're sort of like triggered in how they're looking at things. And so if you think about it, you could run into the real risk. If you just say I'm going to reformulate, you could end up being the next new Coke, where you are the protector changing the ingredients to whatever. But then there is a bunch of people who says, wait a minute, you've just changed everything. It doesn't taste the same. And it's not really for my good, it's for yours. And so I think there's a lot of calculus here that people have to do to understand that this isn't just about identity and I look good, or this isn't a natural thing. As much as I am in self-preservation mode right now, and I'm a mama bear protecting my kids against something that's different. And that means the way that we communicate, engage is very different than we might before.
Okay, so you reformulate your product. And so what do you do? How do you talk about it? What do you do strategically to mitigate that risk and to get people to think that you're doing the right thing?
So for me, I would go through all of those questions that we were talking about before. What questions people have? Why now? Will it taste the same? Will it cost more? What are the things that you can, that the questions are in your mind? So you might frame it around, okay, will it taste the same? Better ingredients, same great taste. Will it taste, that's will it taste the same. Is it going to cost more? Affordable, healthy options might then be your framing. But if you go through all of those, and then there's a number of ways that you can articulate each of them. But I would start by going through what are their concerns and how can you frame this to address their concerns as you communicate.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would add when it comes to reformulating is just the, pure sensitivity around people's taste expectations. To Lee's point, there's a lot of things that are baked into people's psychology around their expectations around especially food that they're habitually eating. And although this may seem better and they may say they want something that's healthier, taste trumps a lot of how we make our choices when it comes to food and beverages. So I think first really getting a deep understanding of our audiences and consumers, that when it comes to before we make some big reformulation decision in terms of I think language and how we frame going about this is really working through that kind of framework in terms of really getting very clear on the intent behind changing an ingredient, and having a strong way to position that in terms of we're now listening to our customers, or we have new technology that helped us innovate to make a product that's superior or meets certain commercial needs or evolve taste in a healthier way. And I think really having some way to spin and have a strong narrative for changing the ingredient is going to be pivotal.
Every word that goes on package now is scrutinized, and that's not always the case. It used to be part of the fine print, and people were looking more about how many carbs were in it rather than what are all of the things made up of. And so it changes how you have to formulate your, not just the formula of the food, but the formula for how you communicate it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. There's a lot, to Lee's point, there's a lot more scrutiny from consumers in terms of what they're eating and what they're putting in their body. And the word healthy, you may have gotten away with it before, but now it's lost a lot of its meaning and impact. And, I think when we think about how we frame and position products in a healthy way, there's a few different things I like to think of. One is relative framing. So healthier is better than healthy. So removing the absolute element, what is this better for? Me, myself, having lost 100 pounds, what was health? There's certain things along my trajectory, having lost weight, that were always healthier, that now I would not consider healthy, but at the time were certainly better. And for certain folks in their journeys, in their life stages, certain things are healthier that you want to position. And this could be competitively focused, that makes you a superior choice than your peers. The next one is kind of situational framing, which I think is important, is also kind of, I would say it's like made for real life, certain situations that are, potentially relevant that make the food position better for that particular situation. And then intention framing, here's why we've made this choice. So, kind of really baking in some of those deeper motivations that make sense around how we're thinking about healthy and positioning that.
Okay, so let's assume that you decide not to reformulate. And if you're not going to reformulate, what do you do?
I think there's a couple things you can do. In one instance, you can wear it like a badge of honor. Like, it's the original. It's the, we're, and almost not fight it, but lean into it and have a whole lot of reactive messages prepared. I don't think going out there and trying to use facts to say, like, this ingredient isn't going to kill you. Here, like, come see us, like, to foodingredients.com. I see a lot of people try to do that when they're trying to explain things. And I think that's a losing, that's sort of a losing argument. I think if you're not going to do it, I think you have to lean into it. So whether it's saying this is the original, this is, or talking about safety in general, but I think there's owning it that is a frame that's really important.
Yeah, I would add to that, a lot of the products that are being criticized have been around longer than most people have been alive. And, certainly products have stood the test of time. They've been around for, in some cases, many decades and some a century. And, now we're questioning certain things that are in them. And, to Lee's point, how can you own that and, stand behind what you've made as, enduring, incredible, and that incredible legacy. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is a really good angle is, leaning into that right to choose, right? No one's putting this in somebody's mouth, right? We're giving them that right to choose. And you're kind of, if, not to play into political sides, but that's also the argument for many of the reverse scenarios that we see in today's environment. So the right to choice is pretty important. So
Instead of trying to convince people that it's safe all the time, maybe sometimes it's just say like maybe there's a portion of your, your diet that should be restricted for treats, for those things that are nostalgic and whatever it is, and create a category or an occasion, as you said before, Jason, that it seems it's just like a moment where you're not thinking about everything else and you just know that that much is safe. And that could be the way you want people to think about it. And then you find the language that gets people to put it in that category of it's just a small indulgence and there's no harm in that. So I think there is a way to do it if you wanted to try and that you're not a big part of somebody's diet, but you want to keep it there. Create that category for them through language.
I think part of what the MAHA movement is trying to do is say that these should be no trade-off choices, that that people deserve to have products that don't have these artificial ingredients in them, and they obviously are not addressing any of the potential trade-offs. They're not addressing the cost trade-offs. They're not addressing the taste or performance, being like how long something lasts trade-offs. And so to what extent is it helpful or important for food companies to be thinking about how they are injecting that back into the conversation? I mean, in the moment, and we've talked about this a little bit today, but at a moment where affordability is the most important issue on the minds of most Americans, is the MAHA movement driving up the cost of food? Is that a salient argument? Is that something that food companies should be doing, or is that a dangerous place to be?
Or do you want to just lean into that and say, if you're not changing certain ingredients, do you want to have real food versus low cost safe food? Or is there some kind of category that you create that is the affordable, safe alternative to fully something? And I'm saying fully something, and I'm sorry to do, but I'm just trying to create the contrast here to say, like, you think about how you might articulate that concept. There might be a territory there that is worth exploring.
yeah, I think when I think about this, I do think about it as like a triangle of taste, affordability, and health. And there's certainly been an uptick in the attention and salience on the health side of things with the MAHA movement. Affordability is certainly highly sensitive in this moment in time, but also taste is certainly one we can't not talk about, because no matter what somebody may say on a customer survey, or they may prioritize health over taste, at the end of the day, their behavior would say that taste trumps most all. So, it's hard to not think about how those are interwoven with one another. And, for me, when I think about it, I would always keep taste at number one, and affordability, even thinking through how we can use language to buffer up that health side. Because I think absence of reformulating, I think language is our best tool and ticket to overcome this moment, and making our products feel healthier for our audiences without messing with the taste, without messing with the affordability.
I got one more question that I want to tee up, and that is that a number of these companies have made commitments to remove artificial ingredients, and they've gotten a lot of credit for their commitments, and they have not necessarily acted on it. Doesn't mean that they won't, doesn't mean that they're not being sincere, but we've seen this in other places as well. We've seen it in clean energy, we've seen it in DEI, where there is a moment where the performative aspects of responding to a movement are actually more important than the substantive aspects of it. To what extent do you think that we are in that moment where it's really the commitment that matters, and that the companies then get credit, they get a little less scrutiny, but that it's not necessarily happening on the store shelves yet, that people are actively moving away from the non-reformulated products versus it being a substantive moment?
So I can't underscore enough how important acknowledging the journey of this is to our food and beverage clients, or even cosmetic clients, who are anybody who's in the business of this. It's people don't expect you to do it all at once, and we need to avoid any language that says we are changing. Here's how. I think the journey allows us a huge amount of latitude, and you can do it for a long period of time. I mean, you think about the environment. It was like, we're going to be net zero by, well, I'm going to say 2030, but that's like in 2005 when I started work on this. Like, you can put it out there as long as you're making progress on it. And so I say you're on a journey to healthier. You're on a journey to better. You're on a journey to whole foods or real foods or whatever it is. You can get away with that as long as you continue to have symbolic gestures that shows that you're making progress along the way. So if there's one thing that you're doing this year, and it might even be a small thing, like it could even be a linguistic thing. Like if you talk about hormone-free chicken, it's like we're on a journey to better, and all of our chicken is going to be hormone-free moving forward. Well, you actually haven't made a change, but you've talked about something that symbolically shows that you are on this way, because it might take your business a long time to catch up. And this isn't a manipulative or an imperative thing. It's like you can't just take an ingredient out today when you have a whole manufacturing process. But you can find something you can do today that allows people to give you permission to take the time you need to make the changes that you do. So make it a journey, show your symbolic gestures that you have along the way, and make sure that you're showing progress. You'll get the latitude as long as you're doing those things. If there's no progress, there's no symbolic gestures, and there's no real action, you're going to fail. But give yourself the permission to take time.
Thank you, Lee and Jason, for joining this conversation. Thanks to everybody for listening in. Remember that when you need your language to work harder to make your audiences listen, care, and act, whether it's persuading, educating, motivating, inspiring, simplifying, differentiating, that's what we do, and that's why we're here. So hopefully this gave you a taste, pun intended, of what we're capable of to help you make your language matter. We'd love to talk to you about any challenges that you may be facing during the course of this year, our 6th season on the air. HearSay is a production of Mislansky and Partners. Thanks to our recording engineer and editor, Ashish Bhattaria, our audio engineer and producer, Matt Storm, and our associate producer, Randy Kirshner. If you like what you hear on HearSay, tell a friend or two to listen, because we love word of mouth, and keep the conversation going by following and engaging with us on LinkedIn at Mislansky and Partners. Until next time, remember, it's not what you say, it's what they hear.